Have you ever looked someone in the eyes, someone struggling with addiction, and wondered, why don't they just stop? Or maybe that someone is you. Maybe you've sat in the dark, holding your breath between cravings, whispering, why can't I stop doing the thing that's killing me? What if the answer isn't weakness, but something far deeper, something spiritual? What if addiction isn't a disease, but a desperate cry from the soul? Carl Jung once said, all addictions are substitutes for legitimate suffering. And in that one sentence, he revealed something that modern psychology, for all its brilliance, often overlooks. Jung didn't see the addict as broken or defective. He didn't view addiction simply through the lens of dopamine trauma or impulse control, though he acknowledged they play a role. He saw addiction as something far more sacred and more tragic, a spiritual crisis. Not a brain malfunction, not a moral collapse, not a lack of willpower, but the soul's cry for something it cannot name. This video isn't about substances. It's not about alcohol, cocaine, porn, or social media. It's not even about addiction in the way you've come to understand it. This is about the abyss inside you, that deep, dark, aching void you've tried to ignore, to medicate, to distract, or silence, the one that keeps calling you back. From the outside, addiction looks like weakness. She just needs more discipline. He's irresponsible. They made their bed, now they have to lie in it. But Jung knew better. He saw through the judgment, the shaming, the endless cycle of blaming. He saw that the addict wasn't searching for a high, they were searching for God in the wrong place. Think about that. Let it sink in. Addiction is not the desire to escape responsibility. It is the desire to escape meaninglessness. The person trapped in addiction isn't lazy or weak. They are exhausted. They're not afraid of pain. They live in pain every day. What they fear most is pain that has no meaning. The kind of ache that lingers without purpose. The kind of suffering that feels invisible to the world. So they scroll, they drink, they smoke, they inject. Not because it heals, but because it numbs. Because for a moment, even a fleeting moment, the chaos stops. Because even toxic comfort feels safer than drowning in silence. It's easy to stand on the outside and say, they should know better. But here's the truth most never say out loud. Behind every addiction is a human being trying to survive in a world that has never fully seen them. People don't become addicts because they want to destroy their lives. They become addicts because somewhere along the way they were taught, either directly or subtly, that their pain didn't matter. That it should be hidden, that it was too much, too inconvenient, too ugly. So they learned to numb it. Addiction is not about wanting more. It's about needing something that no one ever taught you how to find. It is the body trying to feel whole again, the mind trying to find clarity, the spirit reaching desperately for peace. And what if the real addiction isn't to the substance at all? What if no one is addicted to alcohol or cocaine or sugar or their phone? What if people are addicted to relief, to silence, to the illusion that the pain is gone? Because that's the cruel deception of addiction. It masquerades as medicine. It offers temporary sanctuary while deepening the wound it claims to soothe. Jung saw it clearly. The addict isn't trying to escape life. They're trying to escape a life without soul. They are reaching not for oblivion, but for a feeling of being alive again, for something sacred, something lost. The craving, the obsession, the compulsion, it's not random. It's not even always about pleasure. Sometimes it's about simply feeling something because the alternative is unbearable. We misunderstand addiction when we reduce it to the object of fixation. When we say he's addicted to porn or she can't stop drinking, we're missing the truth. The object is never the issue. The issue is what the object replaces: a sense of connection, a feeling of safety, a moment of stillness, an anchor in a chaotic world. That's what the addict clings to, not the drug, but the moment of escape it offers. Even if that moment is destructive, even if it costs everything. Jung described addiction not as a deviation from the human condition, but as the human condition exposed. It's what happens when the outer world becomes unbearable and the inner world goes silent. When there's no space left for grief. When there's no one safe enough to confess the truth. When the world keeps demanding strength from someone who's falling apart. That's when the seed of addiction is planted. Not in sin, not in selfishness, but in desperation. And when the soul has nowhere else to turn, it seeks something, anything that resembles peace, even if it's artificial, even if it's dangerous. People become addicted not because they are weak, but because they are disconnected from meaning from themselves, from others, from purpose. The substance becomes a stand-in for connection, a poor substitute for depth. And when it fades, so does the illusion of safety. This is the tragedy. Many addicts never realize what they're truly searching for. They only know they're starving. Starving for rest, for healing, for love, for the sacred. But you cannot fill a spiritual void with material things. You can try. Many do, but it never lasts. Until someone encounters something stronger than the craving, something more true than the pain, they will keep reaching for the same hollow solution. And they'll keep wondering why it never works. Addiction persists because it offers certainty in a world full of chaos, because it mimics control, because it's familiar. And the mind, no matter how much pain it's in, clings to what it knows. When someone says they're addicted, what they're often saying is, "This is the only thing that makes me feel safe." That's not stupidity, that's survival. And here's what Jung understood better than most: addiction is not a moral failure. It's a message, a map, a signpost pointing toward the sacred thing that was lost. And until we start listening to that message, instead of silencing it, we'll never break the cycle. So what do? We start by telling the truth. We stop treating addicts like criminals. We stop calling them weak, broken, lazy. We stop offering shame when what they need is meaning. And we start asking better questions. What is the pain you have been carrying alone? What is the grief you've been too scared to name? What part of you did the world teach you to bury? Because the addict's journey isn't just about quitting a behavior, it's about reclaiming the soul. It's not about sobriety alone, it's about healing, wholeness, returning to the sacred center that addiction tried to replace. You see, the true antidote to addiction isn't punishment, it's presence. It's the courage to sit in the silence with another person and say, "Your pain matters, your longing matters, you matter." Because when a soul is finally seen, when it's heard and held without judgment, something shifts. And in that shift, healing begins. We ended with the idea that addiction isn't a weakness, it's a message, a sacred signal from the soul. A spiritual crisis, not a character flaw. But if addiction is a cry for meaning, then we have to ask, what is the soul actually crying out for? Addiction at its core is not evil, it's a failed spiritual quest. You're not drawn to destruction because you hate yourself. You're drawn to destruction because deep down you are split in two. There's the part of you that performs, smiles, works, pleases, keeps it together. And there's the part of you that watches it all, quietly whispering, "This isn't me." Addiction begins the moment you betray that quiet whisper, the moment you abandon the deeper truth inside you in exchange for acceptance or approval or safety. That's when the fracture begins. That's when the hunger takes root. Because a soul divided against itself will always search for something to bring it back into unity. And until you return to that forgotten part of yourself, the addiction won't end. No amount of control, punishment, or willpower can fix a spiritual split. That's why Carl Jung famously said, "The cure for addiction is a spiritual experience." Not church, not rituals, not dogma, but a real encounter with something greater than your pain. Because if you don't find that something, if you don't taste something sacred, the bottle, the needle, the screen, they'll start to feel like God. Because they give you, if only for a second, what your soul craves most: silence, stillness, presence. A moment where the ache goes quiet. The hunger at the root of addiction isn't physical, it's existential. It's that aching, hollow feeling that something vital is missing, but worse, that you no longer even remember what that something is. Jung believed that every person has a self, a core essence, a center that longs for unity, authenticity, and purpose. But life doesn't make it easy to live from that place. The world demands masks, it demands fragmentation. And slowly over time, the self becomes buried. Addiction then becomes an unconscious attempt to dig it back up. But here's the tragedy: the addict keeps digging in the wrong place. They search for God in a bottle. They look for peace in a pill. They chase love through strangers, validation, chaos. But all of these are shadows, pale imitations of the sacred. And yet, the hunger itself is noble. That's what most people don't understand. The addict isn't weak, they're honest. They're one of the few people who refuse to live numb. They can't lie to themselves forever. And when the illusion finally breaks, when they admit they're starving for something real, That's when true transformation becomes possible. The danger isn't in wanting too much. It's in settling for too little. The addict doesn't want endless pleasure. They want something real. But the substance, it becomes the nearest, quickest fix for the shame of not having found it yet. Here's where it gets harder. Jung warned us what you're running from is not outside of you. It's inside. He called it the shadow, the parts of yourself you've buried, feared, rejected. Addiction is not the enemy. The enemy is the split self. You try to be strong. You try to be kind, presentable, polite. So you repress the rage, the grief, the shame. But what you repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in the dark corners of your psyche until it leaks out in ways you can't control. That's why addicts often feel like they're possessed, because in a way, they are. Part of them is acting without permission, without conscious awareness. Until you confront that shadow, not destroy it, not shame it, but integrate it, you will never be free. Jung didn't describe the shadow as a monster. He described it as truth, truth you've been unwilling or unable to face. It's the grief you weren't allowed to express. The desire you were told was wrong, the trauma you buried just to survive. And over time, these repressed parts of you begin to rot in the basement of your psyche. When they can't stay hidden anymore, they don't speak in words. They speak in behavior. Addiction then becomes the shadow's language, the soul's way of screaming. If you won't listen to my grief, I will express it through destruction. But here's the paradox. The shadow is not evil, it's honest. It's the part of you that still feels when everything else has gone numb. It doesn't want to destroy you, it wants to be heard. And until you face that shadow, you will always believe the enemy is out there. The drug, the drink, the phone, the dealer. But the real war is internal. And the moment you turn toward that shadow, not with fear, but with curiosity, you begin the sacred process of becoming whole again. Not perfect, not healed overnight, but whole. Here's something no one tells you. Most addicts don't want the high. They want the silence that comes with the high. They don't crave chaos. They crave a pause in the endless noise, the pretending, the performing, the pleasing. The war inside. And for one sacred moment, the substance gives them that. But that moment is short, and the price is enormous. Jung said the soul will not be ignored. If you won't meet it in silence, it will scream through your addiction. Addiction is not an escape. It is an invitation. An invitation to finally turn around and face what you've been running from. Relief. That's the word few addicts say out loud, but it's the one they chase. Not ecstasy, not excitement. Just a moment where the inner war quiets. That's the cruel brilliance of addiction. It delivers silence only to sell it back at a higher cost each time. But Jung would say, this pursuit of relief is not shameful. It is spiritual hunger. The addict isn't trying to escape reality. They're trying to escape a false reality, a world that forced them to bury their truth just to belong. What makes addiction so dangerous isn't only the substance, it's the invisibility of what it replaces. The addict is starving for ritual, connection, meaning. But in a world stripped of the sacred, where life is reduced to screens and noise and speed, people are left hungry for something they can't name. They try to recreate the sacred in solitude, in a bottle, a pill, a screen. But no ritual done in secrecy and shame can truly heal. They don't need more discipline. They don't need more punishment. They need something sacred. Something that shows them they're not broken for craving stillness. They've just been looking in the wrong place. You've heard the phrase rock bottom. But Jung would say rock bottom is not failure, it's initiation. It's the point when nothing works anymore, when no distraction can hold, when no one believes your lies, not even you. And in that collapse, something sacred begins. Because now, there is only truth. And in the brutal silence that follows, something ancient stirs. Not your ego, not your defense mechanisms, not your wounds, but yourself. The deeper part of you that never left. The part that remembers who you really are and what you came here to do. And that Jung believed is where healing begins. Not with more control, but with a kind of death. A symbolic death of the false self, so that the true self may finally rise. In the last chapter, we explored Jung's belief that addiction is not a disease, it's a spiritual cry, a hunger for wholeness. But what happens when the masks fall away, when there's nothing left to numb the ache? That moment, the one many fear most, is what Jung called sacred. Most people misunderstand rock bottom. They see it as failure, collapse, shame, the point of no return. But Jung saw it differently, radically differently. He saw rock bottom not as the end of a story, but as the place where a new one begins. Because rock bottom's where the ego dies. It's where the false self, the performer, the people pleaser, the strong one, the victim collapses under the unbearable weight of truth. The masks fall, the roles crumble, and in that collapse, painful, raw, humiliating, a new space opens. It doesn't feel like a blessing. It feels like death, but it's not the death of you. It's the death of who you thought you had to be. And in that void, something sacred stirs. This is what every myth across every ancient culture has described in some way: the descent, the dark night of the soul, the journey into the underworld before resurrection. What's truly dangerous is not falling to the bottom. What's dangerous is hovering above it for years. Functioning, coping, distracted, never truly crashing, but never truly transforming either. This is the silent death of millions, numbed by routine, buried beneath performance, slowly suffocating in lives that look fine from the outside. But rock bottom is sacred because it forces a choice: evolve or perish. Not physically, spiritually. Do I continue pretending, or do I finally surrender to reality? And that surrender, it's not about religion or a recovery program. It's not about taking on a new identity. It's about surrendering to truth. Truth is brutal, but it is also the only thing strong enough to build a new life on. We live in a world that glorifies motion over meaning. Stay busy, stay productive, stay plugged in, stay medicated. Our culture doesn't teach stillness. It doesn't teach silence. It doesn't teach us how to sit in the presence of our own soul. But Jung saw through it. He believed that every addiction, every compulsion, every panic attack was a substitute for spiritual truth. You don't crave heroin. You crave wholeness. You crave redemption. You crave the feeling of being fully alive without shame. And that's why even in its destruction, addiction is sacred. Not because it should be celebrated, but because it points to something divine. You are not broken. You are on a misunderstood path. But you must stop confusing the substance with the destination. Stop mistaking the needle, the bottle, the screen, for the thing your soul is really chasing. In a world obsessed with progress, we've forgotten about depth. We've lost our connection to the sacred. Jung saw that beneath every addictive behavior lies a misplaced yearning for transcendence. Not religion, not dogma, but oneness. A moment where the ego dissolves, where the noise fades, where something eternal makes contact with the soul. But here's the tragedy: our society offers no real path to that experience. So we settle for counterfeits. We simulate transcendence through chemicals. We chase wholeness through stimulation. We mimic sacred rituals through dopamine loops and digital highs. But false gods always demand more than they give. The high fades, the void returns, and the shame multiplies. Addiction becomes a counterfeit initiation, a rite of passage that promises transcendence and delivers fragmentation. But still the longing remains. And that longing is not shameful, it is holy. It is the soul remembering what it means to be fully alive. When we finally see that the addict is not chasing destruction, but a spiritual homecoming, the entire narrative changes. We stop asking, what's wrong with them? And we start asking, what sacred need went unmet? Because that's the real question. And until we answer it, the cycle will never break. So what does healing look like? Not discipline, not abstinence, not perfection. Integration. Jung said, the gold is in the shadow. That means the parts of yourself you've been trying to kill. They don't need to die. They need to be understood. Your anger carries truth. Your shame holds wisdom. Your cravings are messages trying to lead you back to the part of yourself that was abandoned. The real work isn't just quitting. The real work is asking, why did I need this? What was I trying to escape? What has my soul been trying to tell me that I've refused to hear? Integration doesn't mean erasing your pain. It means bringing it back into the circle. Real healing isn't about becoming good. It's about becoming whole. Most addicts spend their lives trying to amputate pieces of themselves: the rage, the grief, the shame. They believe, if I can just cut this out of me, I'll be free. But those parts don't disappear. They scream through cravings. They sabotage every moment of progress until they are finally seen. Because as Jung taught, the shadow doesn't just hold darkness, it holds potential, your creativity, your courage, your fire. Even your joy, it can get trapped down there in the very same unconscious basement as your wounds. When you finally face your shadow, not with judgment, but with compassion, you don't just get sober, you get reborn. You stop identifying as the addict. You begin to see yourself as the one who survived, the one who endured, the one who stood on the edge of the abyss and lived to tell the truth. This isn't about avoiding temptation forever. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs it. Because when you reclaim the pieces of yourself that were once exiled, you become undivided. That's where the power is. Jung believed that healing begins when the psyche finds a symbol, not a quote, not a technique, a living image, a dream, a story, an archetype that reorders your entire identity. This is what happens in great myths, in spiritual awakenings, in moments of inner revelation. The addict doesn't just stop drinking, he becomes someone else, not by force, but by finally facing the parts of himself he buried. And that Jung believed is what transforms a life. Not punishment, not fear, not willpower, but meaning. The day you realize that your suffering has purpose is the day your healing begins. Because what makes a symbol powerful is not that it explains life, it's that it transforms it. In the end, what begins as addiction is rarely about the substance, it's about the soul. The deeper work Jung believed is not about fighting urges, but reclaiming meaning. Because when pain is seen in the right light, it stops being random and starts becoming sacred. Healing doesn't happen when you recite facts or memorize psychology. It happens when something inside you clicks. Jung knew that true transformation isn't intellectual. It's emotional, symbolic, even mythic. The addict doesn't heal by learning about dopamine. They heal when they feel something shift, when a dream, a breakdown, a moment of surrender reorients their entire sense of identity. Suddenly, the suffering has context. The chaos wasn't meaningless, it was a fire that burned away illusion. And within those flames, something unexpected appears, a blueprint. That blueprint rarely arrives in words. It shows up in images, in stories, in symbols. A personal myth that finally explains why you had to fall and what the fall was preparing you for. In every hero's journey, there is a turning point, but it doesn't come when the dragon is slain. It comes when the hero realizes why they had to face the dragon at all. For the addict, the dragon was never just a substance. The real dragon was self-deception, the refusal to feel, the inner division, the war between who they are and who they pretend to be. And the moment they stop running and turn to face that dragon eye to eye, something ancient begins to stir. A new self begins to awaken, not through achievement, not through control, but through surrender. And from that surrender comes the one thing no high, no thrill, no external validation can ever replicate. Meaning, not borrowed meaning, not motivational poster meaning, personal earned embodied meaning. This is the core of Jung's vision. He didn't label people. He didn't call them addicts, junkies, or broken. He saw stories, not symptoms. To him, every addiction, no matter how dark, was a misunderstood myth waiting to be lived properly. You are not your cravings. You are not your mistakes. You are the one who watches. You are the one who knows something has to change. And if you are brave enough to stop numbing that knowing, to face it instead of fleeing from it, then you begin a journey most never dare to take, the journey back to your center. To call someone an addict is to reduce their entire identity to a behavior. That's exactly what Jung resisted. He didn't see people as problems. He saw them as souls in exile, lost but not broken, disoriented, not defective, people who had simply forgotten how to listen to their own voice. In that silence, the craving grows louder than truth. But the moment the true self begins to whisper again, even softly, the grip of addiction starts to loosen. Not because the substance loses power, but because you remember yours. You are not the cravings that haunt you. You are not the shame that clings to you. You are not your worst night or your most fragile moment. You are the one who knows there must be more. And that knowing, that inner voice, is what makes you dangerous to systems that profit from your silence, to industries that bank on your distraction, to patterns that only survive if you stay numb. Because when you reclaim that voice, you don't just heal, you rewrite the rules. You stop being manipulated by fear. You stop apologizing for your clarity. You stop performing for love you should never have had to earn. Because once you've seen the truth, nothing fake can satisfy you again, not even your addiction. Addiction is not the end of your story. It's a map drawn in the dark, pointing you back toward the light. Jung's message was simple but radical. If you're willing to turn inward, if you're willing to face your shadow, if you're willing to find your own meaning, then the substance will lose its grip because you'll finally remember who you are, and the person you are doesn't need to escape anymore. The journey out of addiction isn't a return to who you used to be. It's a rebirth into someone you've never met, but who you were always becoming. Jung believed real freedom isn't about avoiding temptation. It's about no longer being defined by what once tempted you. Healing doesn't move in a straight line. It spirals. You'll revisit the same wounds, the same shadows, the same fears. But each time you meet them with more awareness, more grace, more strength. What once shattered you now reveals your resilience. What once enslaved you becomes your compass. Not because it vanished, but because you finally understood its message. True freedom isn't about being untouchable. It's about being real. The awakened addict doesn't chase euphoria anymore. They find meaning in the mundane. They no longer run from the silence. They sit with it. They make peace with it. They listen to it. And slowly, Vasalom, the silence becomes home. This isn't a motivational ending. This is a mythic one. Because to overcome addiction isn't just to survive. It is to reclaim your place in the human story. The story of the one who fell, who faced the darkness and returned with gold. Not broken, not fixed, but whole. If this message spoke to something deep within you, if it stirred a truth you'd forgotten or gave words to something you've carried in silence, please like, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Wisdom. This channel is more than a voice, it's a space for those on the journey back to their truth. Because you are not alone, and your story is far from over.